I'm probably gonna. I think I'll have all my hair cut and then I'll probably shave it all off.
Really?
I
Wait,
think
sorry, you're
Can
going
you
to have
tell me
it
when?
cut and then shave it off?
Pardon?
That seems like a slight waste of money on a haircut. But
No, I'll enjoy the
Ooh,
luxury of having a
economics.
haircut and then I'll probably shave it off. Depends on school. Although
Oh no,
definitely.
no. Just as a dick move, like have your hair cut and then be like, oh, thank yeah, and then they show in the mirror and you're like, oh yeah, really good. Then you just take a razor out.
Well,
that would actually make a really funny video.
I thought
I
you
reckon
meant like.
that would be clickbait. That would be
Oh
like,
yeah.
yeah, he's paying for a haircut, asking them what they thought, and then just pulling a razor out and just shaving off, and then walking out of their hairdressers.
When you said razor, I thought like cutthroat razors, so like a single
I
blade, of,
meant
like
shaving,
scalping
yeah.
yourself, just like.
Just pull one out and then just do like a line right down the middle of your head, and then be like, get on it, and then walk out. Just see what they'd say.
Yeah, just.
Hello, and welcome to this week's No Idea Yet. Too afraid to ask? Too lazy to Google? You're in the right place. Today I am the host, and I'm joined, of course, as usual, with Alistair
Hello there.
and Jonathan.
Hello.
So, this week we have fantastic news, of course, as always, and this news will be tied with my topic. So, the news that may have been noted on ITV, BBC, CBS, Fox News, who knows, is that Alistair has moved into a house.
I really thought you were going to go with Prince Philip.
I really thought you were going to take
Yeah.
Prince Philip's time. So the day I moved in was the day Prince Philip died, actually. So if we ever go and celebrate it in the
That's probably
anniversary.
why it wasn't on the news as much with your house.
Yeah, it was really.
Yeah,
I was
probably
driving around
understand
super
it.
happy, and it was just like really somber music everywhere for like
Yeah.
days.
So, not to get too dragged into that topic, because that's not it. The topic today that I would be interested to see what you guys already know about, and then for a bit of research, is homelessness.
Ooh.
So, obviously, to take actually, I say obviously, but you never know. Can you guys define for in this country? We'll start off with the UK. What is homelessness?
Would you mean being destitute, or do you mean being in poverty? Because I think poverty is about £157 a week, and then destitute's about less than 70. Right? I heard that somewhere. I can't remember where.
One without a permanent residence, something like that.
I mean, I don't know. I haven't researched it.
I like just saying, like, is it this? No, I don't know, man. I'm asking you.
I'm just the host. Who's no idea.
Yeah.
Leave me alone, man.
Okay, no, that's good though. So, without permanent resident, Alistair, would you change that at all?
No, I thought it was when you're living on the street. When you, it depends if you. There probably are different definitions of
If
it.
you
But
live
I'd
in a
have thought.
forest.
Okay, so then
I think
if you're staying at a mate's house,
sleeping rough. So if you, I think if you don't have anywhere that you're, I don't know,
Call home.
nowhere to hang, nowhere to hang your hat.
no. But what if you haven't got a house, but you've got a mate, and you're staying at your mate's until you find your feet in bed?
Surfing or squatting.
Come
I mean, is squatting homelessness?
Yeah, I don't think that's being like homeless in the same way that, because I think being homeless would be like not having anyone else to like rely on. Because that's like saying, well, if you live in your parents' house, you're obviously not homeless, but you are relying on someone else. So I think it would be like not being self-sufficient in that way, and also not having anyone else to.
I kind of feel like if you're not able to open a bank account easily because you don't have like a permanent residence, like an address to put something to, I think that would be quite a good indicator. You know.
But you see, this is something that then we're gonna now move on to the next part of becoming homeless. I'm assuming the majority of people, yes, there are people like kids who run away and people who haven't maybe found their feet at an early age, but maybe the majority of homeless in our country, at least, have already probably had a job or had a bank account or something in the past, and then have become homeless, right?
Not born onto the streets, you mean?
Yeah, not literally born on the A37.
Or the M6.
I don't know why I've said that.
Um,
Yeah. So, how do you think people become homeless in this sense? I mean, I guess it's you lose your job and then you don't have the money to support yourself, but then there are various things I think put in place to stop you from really hitting that rock bottom.
I think the biggest thing of what I think is you have to take yourself out. You know, the cliche, take yourself out of your own shoes, because it's so. You know, a lot of people paint people with the same brush stroke, whatever. Of you know, well, why are you homeless? How do you even get to that situation? I can't understand, because it will be so like for me personally, it'd be so hard for me to physically become homeless because I've got such a support network. You know, got family, friends, stuff like that. There'd be people who'd be able to do whatever. I think that's it. It's people who don't have good family relationships. It's when they don't have good friendships, and that's not saying they don't have friends. Just more of like workmates. Someone's like, I'm not really comfortable with having you in my house. To live. I just like hanging out with you at work, or whatever. And I think that's where the biggest thing comes from, of when you don't have those networks. Where if something goes wrong in your job, if whatever happens, or you get kicked out of home when you're younger, there's nowhere else for you to go, and for a lot of people it's hard for them to ask for help or even know where to ask for help from, and I think that's the biggest thing for any homelessness, is because you don't have those connections where you're able to stay at somebody's house, either be a parent, a friend, or whatever, and you've got nowhere else to go.
So what do you think on the path of becoming homeless?
I think it's such a cliche that I almost feel worried saying it, in terms of it's probably the first little bit I have, but it's the whole idea of obviously, if your life spirals out of control and with sort of the drink and drugs kind of thing, that's that whole route, which is, I think it's kind of, a story as old as time really. But I think that's obviously, it's very much an association people have with homelessness. I think like the sort of, especially drug addiction, but equally alcohol can be obviously just as dangerous as that. I think, that's definitely I'm not saying obviously that's the thing, but
I'm not saying
everyone knows that the kind of damage that alcohol and drugs can cause your life if you get out of control of them. So
they can wreck those connections you had previously. So a reason why you may not have them is because of that.
Something that I just wonder if you guys heard about. I'm not saying that it's true or not true or how it works, but have you either heard about the idea that once you become homeless, you're so bored, like so mind-numbingly bored, that you turn to drugs? I don't know if either of you heard about that. It's something that I read about once. Like some guy who said,
especially obviously heroin gives you supposed to give you that really sort of like super euphoric, super amazing feeling, right? And it's like, well, if nothing else in your life is even remotely vaguely good, then there's this thing that's super cheap and very accessible and will make you feel instantly a million times better and then so to say no to that would be like, I don't know, I think that'd be a very difficult.
That's the thing.
It sounds true, but I didn't know heroin was cheap and accessible.
No, the thing is, it's cheap though, isn't it? It's not expensive.
It's hilariously cheap compared. Like obviously,
I have no idea.
You probably don't get that many homeless cokeheads because it's. I don't know, but I think
I think it's something like I'm sorry, like if you go like Frank or something like that. I remember look up ages ago. I think it's something like £10 or something like that, or maybe even less.
For what, a hit, or for an amount that gets you multiple hits?
I don't know, maybe it's like a £5 a hit, something like that. I can't remember. I remember it being ridiculously cheap, which is just mad. And I guess because your customer base isn't some student who wants to get high or something and therefore has money from whoever, either student loan or parents, or somebody with a job. It's somebody who has hardly any money, and it's becoming they want it all the time.
I think a lot of people find him quite insufferable, but Russell Brand has some quite interesting stuff on this because he was homeless for a time and he was a heroin addict. So, well, he definitely bought heroin off homeless people. I think his whole life was a bit
I'll put that in with it. Yeah. Okay, so next question. Since this is obviously the first part, so we're just putting the feelers out for what we know. How do they survive?
It depends where you are, because I definitely think like the reason why you don't see as many homeless people in like smaller towns is because I guess the biggest thing is asking for money, effectively. And I know you go into like definitely what you perceive of people, because I know in some cities I heard from somebody who had like a coffee shop who'd been chatting to the homeless people who just hang around nearby and sometimes get them. They'll sometimes get like, if you're in a city which is affluent and in a nice area, sometimes you get like over £100 a day, something like that, just because people are just passing by. And especially if you're, once I went to the guy had no idea, but absolutely genius. So it was a Christian event, and it was in like a big theatre in Preston, and obviously, so you've had for the past 2 hours loads of people like riling up and everything like that, and it's part of the ending message was going out into the streets and stuff like that, and then, unbeknownst to this homeless guy who was sat at the car park, people are walking out. You've got like 500 people walking out, proper like beaming, raring to go. Homeless guy just like sat at the car park, and it's like he must have made like £1,000 in one night, because everyone being like, "Yeah, I'm gonna give to you, man. Like help you out, give numbers." Probably got a lot of help as well for like people, giving numbers and stuff like that. But it's just, yeah, I mean, cities, people are able to get money because if you think just purely on small transactions, somebody's walking by, I'll give you 20p, I'll give you that, I'll give you whatever. Someone's maybe a bit generous,
Yeah.
but obviously,
Imagine how bad that's hit by COVID. Then A, people not having money,
Yeah.
and B, just not having
not
that
being
footfall.
out.
Yeah, so
I think homeless people are really badly affected as well because,
yeah.
you know,
Well, to answer your question, Fred, I think one of the really terrifying and really sort of tragic things about it is that a lot of them don't. A lot of homeless people die. Like, it's a very common thing to happen, right? Because
especially depending on the
probably
country.
far more than people even realise. Because obviously, the whole thing of being homeless is that they're not. The government probably doesn't have very good figures on that because obviously they don't fill out the census. There's nothing like that, so they're not going to be.
But you find dead bodies, right? I assume.
If they were like lying on the streets dead everywhere, then obviously people would kind of.
I definitely
It
don't want
would
to say
be
like
a big deal.
all homeless people get like £100 a day or anything, but I think like there's the possibility if you're lucky and you're in the right area and you know what you're doing, kind of thing. But I'm not putting that as like say like, oh, all homeless people have it easy or whatever, or they choose to be there because they can get more paid more than they can get in a job. It's just so somebody knew who had a coffee shop was saying that like they were chatting to somebody, so like effectively start asking a life story kind of thing. It's at the moment was like, have you ever thought about like the situation you're in? So like, honestly, it's easier for me to get money as I'm doing now than it would be to get a job. So he's just happy doing what he's doing, which is fair play to him, I guess. But that's
I feel like,
an anecdotal story, so I'm not. Yeah,
I think it completely depends where you are massively, but equally, I don't know. I feel like in the summer it probably isn't as bad, but homeless in the winter, obviously it's very UK, but I feel like that would be serious. Like I said, I have unintentionally slept on the street sort of twice, I think, and it was never.
Me too.
It was really, really unpleasant. Like it was really not,
Yeah.
Again, I appreciate how much I live an incredibly pampered, incredibly kind of easy life by relatively speaking. So one night on the street would be really, really rough. But yeah, no, it's.
I've seen drunk guys like sat next to homeless people, like ranting at them, holding the KFC in one hand, back in Manchester, and being like, let's see what it's like. Like, come on, like, this guy does it all the time. Like, we've got to sleep out with him. Like, know what it's like sleeping rough. And the homeless guy's like, just go home, mate. Like I don't care about you being here. Just leave. I don't want anything from you. Go away.
Yeah.
Just harassing them.
What's that a weird
That's the conclusion you jumped to when I said I've slept homeless. That's what I was going for. It was more.
Hopefully not.
I had a weird dynamic once at a house party where a homeless guy was invited in, and it was obviously students, and there was just one homeless guy. It's that weird kind of thought of like a clashing of cultures, I guess, would be the thing of being like, for him it's like you are inside in a warm house with a lot of people. What a difference
It's gotta
that
feel
is
weird.
to your I mean, it got a bit awkward and stuff like that. I think. Because people gate crashed that party, including there was like 10 other people,
Including you.
Invited. No, I wasn't invited to that one. But yeah, like 10 people gate crashed and then brought the homeless guy with him. He was a bit Larry, but
Oh, poor guy.
yeah. But it's that thing, isn't it? Like if you were homeless, you'd take any opportunity.
So, Alistair, what do you think about and I mean this just as the way it's kind of portrayed in media, the problem of homelessness? Like, is it like a problem that needs to be dealt with in certain ways? Do you think that people could solve it on their own? Do you think the government has an obligation to solve, as in like inverted commas, this crisis? Like, what do you think?
I think that's super. I think it's something that I think we mentioned this before on the podcast. Like the idea of future generations looking at the fact that we have homelessness and being like, what? Like, why? You're letting other humans live like that? That's appalling. Like, there are empty houses everywhere, and and then obviously so it's clearly a more complicated problem than that. Because if it was that simple, it wouldn't be a thing, right? So, I think I definitely would not say that any homeless people want to be homeless, but I do think that the institutions in place to fix it don't actually fix the problem properly, obviously, because it's still there. So it's the problem of it persists. But I think is there an element of the kind of obviously an addict doesn't want to get an addict who doesn't want to get clean won't get clean. It's as simple as that. And if everything's there, it's the things that are sort of holding them in that world, I think might be stronger than you'd give credit for. Maybe
I've just missed it, but like mental health has got to be one of the biggest things.
Yes, and I was going to comment on that in the beginning. Actually, that is absolutely. Again, that's a big thing for like driving away or people who are close to you and everything, right? So
say if for whatever reason, if something happens, say if you have like bipolar, for instance, there's an easy way to get completely destitute in a way that I mean, I think people sometimes think bipolar as being happy and sad, but totally not. Manic can be like you spending your life savings in one night because it just felt like a good idea to do it, and it's not rational thinking at all. He's like, well, I was just having a great time and spent all my money,
Manic
and that's the
depressive.
reason suddenly you can become homeless. You could gamble your house away, for instance, suddenly homeless, and then being on the streets means you're going to have those similar things, and if not kept in check, I mean, it's going to be so difficult to get back into a normal routine of life because first you need medical attention and like mental health attention, and then you need the whole issue of trying to actually get a job, a house, and which is a huge thing in the first place. Starting from
Well,
zero to get to
that's
something.
you made me think of, okay, it's gonna, I don't know a way of saying this without sounding super hippie, like, about this, but I mean, the way you talk about it is very normal, but like the concept of getting a house and working a 9 to 5 and using that money to get food is a social concept, right? We've only come up with it in whatever amount of years, and we're like, this is the way you have to live, this is what normal life is. And like, there is never going to be one way that suits everybody. Living the 9 to 5 and having a job in that normal sense kind of thing is like, that's not always going to fit everyone, right? But we say that's the way you have to do it. If you don't conform, you're on the street, potentially.
Yeah, fully.
Yeah, I mean that's I think obviously that's the construct that we have built as a society. Obviously works for the rich and the people who have made it that way, and therefore it kind of. Because I think there's a huge stigma attached with homelessness. I don't think we've really touched on yet. The whole thing of like feel like just what that does to your mental health, even if you were okay before, like just having people walk by you and ignore you and treat you like something less than human all the time. Like it must be completely and utterly like soul crushing.
Soul destroying.
You think,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that element of it, like the sort of stigma that comes with it, rather just not just the situation of how unpleasant it would be on the whole, the stigma with it. I think that's a real kind of the kicker.
Okay.
Then obviously,
Yeah. Do either of you have any idea about homelessness in another country? Is my last thing I just want to go in. Like maybe in other places it's kind of frowned upon and less frowned upon and kind of seen as like more noble, or places where there's no homelessness, like probably those Scandinavian countries.
Some countries go to, people seem to have a lot less limbs than they do in the UK for being homeless. I do like people.
Oh my God.
I'm saying it in that way, but do you know what I mean? Of like, in the UK, very rarely it's a case of people are, of, I'd say, relatively good health in a way that I'm not saying that they're healthy, but a case of got everything. At some places, there's people having like no legs or missing like hands, stuff like that. And
so that was huge in China. There was this, I remember the first time I saw a homeless person in China, it really struck me because in the UK you think, oh, maybe I should give them some money, like that would be a nice thing to do. In China, you think if I didn't give that person some money, they would be dead tomorrow. Like it literally is that extreme. But then I found out after that is a lot of those people were like peddled by gangs because they're so it looks in such a bad way that they actually make loads of money from being on the streets, which is really it's just appalling. But then all that money, if you give to them, this goes off to these gangs that peddle them, and even inside, I think like cut their legs off so that they can be more. It's absolutely horrendous. But
I guess that's a sign of disability benefits and stuff. So in the UK, like
That's an extreme.
wow, that's a serious U-turn, Johnny.
I meant to be the reason why in the UK you may not see people without limbs who are begging is because you may be able to be supported financially by the government, whereas somebody somewhere else, if you're not able to work because you've lost your hand in a workplace accident and you weren't able to get any kind of payout or whatever, it means a case of, no, I can't afford to work. If I don't have any good connections, then I have to go. There's nowhere else but to be homeless. So that could be a case. It could. I'm not saying it is. Could be a sign of like a, what do you call it? Social giving, whatever.
Yeah.
Fair.
No,
I'm not saying that the Yakuza are going to be like, oh look, here's some disability benefits, we're going to use it. I meant the UK obviously had something in place, or maybe in case we just don't lose limbs. I don't know.
Well. Okay. Well.
To be fair, health and safety is not what it could be in China.
Actually hearing about that. I know Abby's dad being into construction. I can't remember where he was. Somewhere in Asia. I'm going to say Asia is a very broad thing because I don't know. I'm not going to.
Quite large.
It's quite large. I was saying like, oh, it's really good. The death count on the worksite was 14 this year. And I said, what do you mean that's good? It should be 0. There should be no deaths. And it's something like, oh, you got so many X amount of hundreds of workers working there. It's like, and the death for a year was 14 people died on a construction worksite in somewhere in Asia in a country.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, in the UK it should be zero. Dude, that's our gold standard is zero, never anymore. And it's a big thing when it does happen.
Gold standard. Oh my God. No, but this
So,
this is. I talk to people. I mean, again, my company's in construction. It's exactly the same thing. Is that some guy was telling me that not for this company, but for their previous company that was contracted in Malaysia, they were like, yeah, basically, if someone dies or is horribly disfigured, they get a set amount that they send to the family, and then they get employ someone else. That's just how they deal with it, and the family knows they're getting that money, and that's a thing that just happens.
well,
But
Well, it's completely It's one of those things that just shocks you to your core if you've grown up in like the UK, for example, where everything is super health and safety and everything. Like there was this, we were walking up this place in Qingdao, in sort of in China again. I apologize for keep talking about this, but obviously but yeah,
that's experiences.
as I said, living experience and everything. But yeah, walk up this path and then we just heard this like almighty crash from like massive bang really like from just around the corner. And we thought, what on earth is that? And so we went just up the corner, just turned to the right, and it was just these guys on the roof of the building, it's probably about 7 or 8 stories, just lobbing lumps of concrete over their shoulder off the roof onto the pavement below, with no signs or nothing anywhere. It would like if you just walking like that. If you were running, you run around that corner, you would in absolutely no question you'd be dead. If you were hit by one of these bits of concrete, you would be absolutely dead, like no problem. No question at all. And these guys are just lobbing lumps of these concrete off this roof onto the pavement below. And it was just like
No consequence.
this is absolutely mental. Like, that was when I was quite. I thought, it was the first few weeks we were in China. It was just like this is
Quite green. On that concrete bombshell, I'll leave you guys to do your research
I'm not a terrible
on
segue at that.
on homelessness. But thank you for joining us for the first half. I'd like you guys to go away and have a little look. Maybe a few statistics would be quite interesting, like actual percentage of people who become homeless due to drugs, or actual statistics in certain countries of homelessness or how they deal with it. That would be great. Otherwise, anything else that you find interesting, please go ahead and Google through that stuff. And we'll be joining you guys after the break.
Hi listeners, regarding this week's episode on homelessness, we'd like to let you know that if you have an old coat, sleeping bag and just other clothes that you don't use anymore, please consider donating them to Wrap Up. Wrap Up work in London, Leicester, Manchester, Birmingham and Glasgow, and they hand out these clothes in the winter to those in need. If you'd like more information, please head over to handsonlondon.org.uk/wrapuplondon, where you'll find all the information you need. Thanks.
Hello and welcome back after the break to this week's No Idea Yet. Been a minute for you and a week for us. And today we've been talking about the topic of homelessness. So, I'm looking at you guys. What research have you done? I gave you a few questions, a few statistics potentially to look up. What did you get down to?
well, the first things first. Of course, we're going to go straight to it.
The
It's the
definition.
thing on everyone's
It's guts to get the
mind.
definition on, man.
It's definition.
I did, yeah. I
So
did
the
like that.
first thing I looked up for just the dictionary definition, and then it went into, at least in the UK, they actually have like, the dictionary definition is of a person without a home and therefore typically living on the streets. But so looking at a statistic on it was the Guardian or something like that, they said headline statement was 70,000 households in the UK made homeless during pandemic, and this is a misleading title, I feel, dependent on the definition and the implied thing they were trying to get across, because legally, so the UK legally classes it as a household has no home in the UK or anywhere in the world available to reason to occupy. So examples would be rooflessness, so that's sleeping rough, houselessness, temporary sleeping in an institute or a shelter, living in insecure housing, which is you're possibly going to get evicted, maybe you've got domestic abuse, you're sofa surfing, and then living in inadequate housing, which is like illegal caravan sites, unfit housing or overcrowding. So when they say 70,000 people have become homeless, it could mean that they're in the risk, maybe this like sofa surfing, maybe they have the risk of eviction or things like that. That's what some of the furlough.
What about the more practical ones of that then? Like, if you're like living on, like staying at a friend's house, for example, or if you're like,
yeah,
does that
Even if
obviously count as sofa surfing, right?
yeah, because one thing was it's like in 2019 it was like 280,000 people were homeless, and it was 288,470 households were were owed assistance from councils to prevent or relieve homelessness. And I guess that's the thing of like, if you need the government to help you from being homeless, then it isn't a form of homelessness, isn't it? Because without that help, you would be. So I guess that's what they also classify it as. So it's sometimes when they say 70,000 people homeless, we always think sleeping rough, but what it actually means is more of a case of you don't have secure housing, be that in the hypothetical, like, you're one bad day away from being homeless, or, maybe you domestic abuse to the point where you actually need to leave the home, but you don't have anywhere secure for you to go. But yeah, so that's one thing of homelessness. For me, I always thought was sleeping rough. Was actually, what was it, in 2019, they estimate homelessness by on one particular night rather than like a sweeping statement kind of thing for the year, and it was of a single autumn in 2020 was 2,688 people sleeping rough. They assume these are considerably underestimated. It was recorded in 2019 though, 4,266, so it's actually been down. But in 2010 it was 1,200, so it's been rising quite a bit over the past 10 years. But we've actually just from 2019 to 2020 we've actually like gone down a bit. So that's something.
Because I saw, like, there's a thing about, like you said, not just sleeping outside, but people who are staying in a temporary accommodation, people who are staying at friends' houses because they don't have a permanent address, people who are in some sort of council move because they didn't have a good address, or people who are in a system of some kind that they don't have anywhere really that they call their own, but they're being moved or they are moving. And if you take that into consideration, 1 in 53 people in London is homeless.
Wow,
Like in a state of, basically a state you definitely don't want to be in, right? Or I don't want to be in, and all of, like, yeah, because you don't want to just be like, oh well, you have to be literally sleeping on concrete for me to like care about you and call you homeless. Like, there's so many other bad situations that will also come under the same umbrella. But if you take that into consideration for the whole of the country, I think it was 2017. This one was 1 in 200 people in the UK were in a situation like this, and that's just mad. Because I think at the same time, Finland, less than 800 people in Finland.
Oh, see, I didn't look into other countries for this one. I just went effectively focused on the UK. I was curious about the pandemic or what.
It's very lucky you didn't, Johnny, because one of the articles I read. All right, this is scary to your core. It was, as we have mentioned, there is no internationally agreed definition of homelessness. So I'm not sure how you're going to go with the no internationally agreed definition, but I assume that is all like the sort of relative homelessness, right? Where it's sort of how you are compared to the rest of the population that you live around. Because obviously, given different economic factors and things in different countries, it's also going to be very different. What would be considered homeless here would be
so we'd be like, oh, I have to be on benefits, otherwise I'd literally be homeless. If they didn't pay me an extra, 200 quid a month, I would be on the streets because I couldn't afford to live. And it's like, yeah, whereas another country would be like, no, it's when you don't have a home you become homeless. Not when you actually do have a home, you just need to help out. So I guess
it's also just literally the relative wealth of people around you. So like here, or any developed country can versus like sort of any like sort of third world kind of thing, right? That's
yeah, but I mean, relative. They're like, I mean, I want to disagree a bit about that. Like relative, like imagine relative hunger. Like, oh right, well in this country not many people have much to eat, and so really, how dare you say that you're hungry? Like there are people starving in somewhere else, but they're still starving. Like people still don't have the basic necessities, right? Even if the whole country had that, relative to each other, they're all at the norm, but they still are all having a bad time. Don't you think?
I guess my always thought is, you get first world problems and third world problems, but at the end of the day, there's still problems for that individual, aren't they? When you take away the comparison.
I know that sounds more like you're trying to argue, like, oh, well, me having lost my iPhone charger for a day is just as bad as someone who's starving.
It still,
it is. It's speaking. Yeah. I think obviously the biggest sort of injustice when you look at all that is the complete inequality between like the rich and poor divided, even in the larger scale and then on a smaller scale. So, it's all a bit.
Fair enough.
I think it's that
good topic for everyone. We're going to get really sad talking about this one, I think.
Well, it's that thing to keep you humble, but also don't get depressed when you feel like your problems are so insignificant you're not allowed to be sad.
Yeah,
Because
that's a
the thing
nice
as well,
balance, I think,
like,
between the two.
because for different things like depression is people are like, well, I don't actually have real problems because someone's got it worse than me, to a point of where they don't accept they're having a bad time. Doesn't mean if somebody's dying right now means you are subjectively having a bad time. If you
Mm.
don't combat that, then you're gonna have a worse time and keep thinking you're not having a bad time, and it doesn't help the issue.
Well, so that's true. So, did either of you look into causes of homelessness?
Um, I got a cool thing from our friend Tyler, who from uni. So
Was definitely
he
homeless for a bit.
yeah, probably, yeah.
Yeah, he was.
As in like a technicality of, like, if it was whatever. But yeah, he's a bouncer in clubs and stuff and bars, and then during the pandemic they all closed down. So what he did instead, he was still employed, but he was doing it for the homeless places. So it'd be a case of he'd be like security and guard and things like that.
What? I had no idea he was
And I
doing
asked
that.
him, I was like, "This is perfect." As we're doing a whole podcast episode on it. Like, what's your view of, like, what are the causes and, like, things like that? What's your view on homeless people? So I'll read it out. To quote, depends. Some of them are just young and cold at night, so they turn to drugs because they have nothing else. Some just have nothing else apart from drugs and alcohol, so even if they got a home, that's all they turn to. And some are just effing arseholes. So it's difficult to determine which is which, so you can never tell the good ones from the bad ones. Also, people will stay homeless until it becomes something that they want to change themselves. So you can help and offer homes and money, but unless they're willing to change, then they always revert back to their old selves.
That is
Yeah,
actually
so
really
I,
interesting.
I think I was saying, like, why do you think people become homeless, and, like, how is drugs and alcohol kind of thing of it? And it's more of it's a mixed bag of things, really, And they say, like, some good, some bad. You can't tell the difference anyway, and it's not unless someone wants to try and make a change. I know I was chatting to my brother a while ago and saying, like, there are women and children get priority in all the systems, so men are usually at the end of the queue, so they have the longest waits to get kind of housing and all the resources available. But they're still there. You just have to wait. Yeah, and obviously, I think a lot of people get sick of the system, kind of stuff like that, and then it's. But
Yeah.
I didn't research that, so I'm not gonna
No,
go
no, no.
definitive on
Because
that.
I did have a quick peek into a few studies on homelessness. I tried to keep it to the UK because otherwise you just go down a huge, huge rabbit hole. And one particular one that I really enjoyed was enjoyed
It's a laugh in
was
it, that one.
I know it was literally called homelessness in the UK. Who is most at risk? And it breaks down. It does compare to other countries sometimes, but it breaks down kind of causes of homelessness and percentage chance of it happening to you. And it starts off with the fact that some politicians like to quote, "We are 2 paychecks away from homelessness." And like anyone can be 2 paychecks away from homelessness, for example. And they were like, "Is this true?" And so they broke it down, and it turns out obviously it's not true because it's hugely dependent on, well, two parts: individualistic like variables such as mental health, drugs, and personal issues, and then there's the structural problems such as availability of jobs, the housing market, and the poverty that you're born into. And one of the things was just like, if you're born into poverty and potentially end up having small periods of time homeless as a child or in that kind of situation, is like a huge factor for being homeless later. And one of the things they were questioning was also just like, is it the fact that you see this whole culture that the rest of us is kind of hidden from, if that makes sense? Like, and I'm not saying that it's not bad, but it made me wonder if kind of, if you see that it's possible to survive in that situation and you're having a really bad time, but you recognize that, like, I don't know, you recognize the rock at the bottom as being there. I wonder if that makes it more kind of like you could actually hit that rock first, and like Tyler was saying, like not change that, but be doing other stuff and surviving at that bottom. And whereas I guess for me, who hasn't had to grow up in those kind of situations, I almost fear that bottom because I never have seen it. I don't know
Yeah,
what you guys think.
yeah.
No, I think that's a really good point, actually.
I
Go
get
on,
what you
Johnny,
mean,
sorry.
because for us, when we start to go, we're getting closer. Like at this, like it's like between difference between a sea and a swimming pool. Like that thing of like you don't actually know what's below that point, but you know it's bad. You know, like, oh, I never want to be dipping too low because I actually have no idea what's below there, but I just know it scares me. So I guess when you start getting close to that point, you may feel to start fighting back more. Whereas if you've already been to that point, you may get to that point and then you start to fight back. I don't know if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think you get what I mean, but yeah.
I get what you mean, yeah.
I don't think you mean, you get there, you're like, oh, it's fine. I think, yeah, it's more, like I said, it's all that. Sort of, yeah, it's just given. I mean, the other extreme of it would be like, someone who lived a complete life of luxury and, kind of like, if any interest in that, just go listen to last week's episode. Hey? But like someone, if you were like waited on hand and foot for your entire life to the point you never even been in a kitchen before and stuff like that, and then you had to go and fend for yourself in a normal setting, it would be kind of, is it exactly what you're going for, or is it? Yeah, it would be kind of.
Well, kind of like for them, even just having to go into a kitchen would be they wouldn't be able to function. I mean, someone who hasn't really had to do anything themselves. You must have met people at work who have never had a job before, and they're like in their 20s, and you're like, you are sometimes, often useless. You have just no concept of what you're doing here, and it's a struggle for them definitely to start and get into it. But then they can. And so I wonder if it kind of like the converse is us also not having a concept of how low you can go. And
I guess, would you say the other sort of flip side of that would be that then we assume that everyone who is homeless is constantly fighting to stop being homeless, whereas other people who are just homeless and they kind of happy with it, but they're kind of content, I guess, in a way, or they're just kind of, or they're at least like Johnny, as you said about like the sort of addicts who don't want to change, right? And then it's kind of the thing about if you would want, like, obviously, if you give them the opportunity, they would, probably bite your hand off to get into some housing or get into whatever they would, to improve their situation.
Well, here's a part. I'm just going to quote this from the paper. So they had different bands of people in certain parts of their study. For example, you had like in one section they had like band A, you're single but you have a full-time job in a good neighborhood. B, you're a single parent but you're renting. C, you're an adult who has a job but you have no qualifications, but you live with parents. It kind of like they're covering different sections, and one of like you're single and you don't have any qualifications and you're in poor housing, blah 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 blah. There's a massive paper. Here's a bit from the conclusion. The weighted possibility of homelessness in some systematically disadvantaged groups is so high that it is the norm.
Jesus.
Yeah, I guess if that kind of answers your point, like to some people it is so common it's normal.
I was thinking of, I was trying to think of a way to like a metaphor of, obviously this is a completely different setting, but the idea of say if you went from uni and you got some high paying job immediately, suddenly you're like, I don't know, an accountant or something, and like that's your norm, and then say you worked at McDonald's first and then you became an accountant. So those two people, one is like, if you lose your job, it'd be like, oh, you'll have to go work at McDonald's. One person would be like, I can do that, so that's fine. I guess I can keep doing that until I get in a better position, and then I'll go back. Whereas the other person will be so like, no, I never want to work there. I want to stay exactly where I am. So they'll make sure there's more of a deterrent, if you know what I mean. I'm trying to think of more.
No, I disagree with it. Just the point that I think that people do, people like get used to what they've got. I've made this point before on the podcast, I'm sure, but how quickly you get used to something once it's like becomes your norm again. Like something good comes along, if you improve your situation in life, but then you'll very quickly not want to go back to the way it was before. So I think I'd argue that the person who used to work at McDonald's would work even harder to keep their good position.
I was thinking more, when if you grew up with part of your life becoming homeless with a parent, for instance, and then you come out of it again, maybe that, because I think Freddie said, often think of where there's a higher likelihood of going back into it or whatever. Yeah,
the difficulty is that, again, this study talked about was just that it is hugely complicated, the factors, but the problem was that if you're in a certain group or you're in a social structure, you have masses of cushioning compared to some that have almost nothing, right? Mm-hmm. So potentially the person who was in the McDonald's position and then got into the finance or whatever, like yes, they
Apologies
work
to
harder.
anyone working at McDonald's listening to this podcast, by the way.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, but,
It's
you
not a
know,
classic thing. Yeah.
You have a
You
job
know,
that requires no
yeah.
qualifications
Yeah,
at first,
I'm
and
with
then you
you.
get into something later. Yes, it's like an example of it. Yeah,
with it,
but
yeah.
ha.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your fast food chain TM.
They're meant
you
to
work
be
in
one of the best employers in the UK, apparently, McDonald's.
like probably like that and Aldi, right?
Yeah, totally.
Like they probably were in a different social circle, right? The other person maybe didn't need to have a job because they already had those huge cushioning factors before they got into the finance section because they didn't need a job beforehand. And so like this all ties in together. And the biggest thing, which is kind of sad, compared with like Denmark, they put like Denmark and the US, they put Australia, all these things in, and it doesn't matter how good your welfare system is, it doesn't matter how like much money is put into this or that or whatever. The biggest cushioning factor was just having a good social network, a partner, or a family. Doesn't matter how good your government is in these certain situations. There's always a downside. Yes, there's like good housing in like Finland, for example, but poor something for drugs. Or there's good something in Denmark, but poor this. There's a balance, right? I'm not saying that the government doesn't help. I'm just saying that the biggest preventative was actually just having a good social network. And I was like, I mean,
It's, you know,
I mean,
it's hard to do
so
stuff
what
on
could
your
the
own.
government do to improve that? Do you reckon? Could the government actually feasibly have any policies that would improve that? Like,
oh yeah, they said
like I say, it's so
100%. No,
unique to every individual that you know.
Yeah,
I'm not sure
it's
what
the-
a government could do.
it's
Government given mates. Here you go.
Government being chat to some sort of Boris bot.
oh my god.
of an evening. That'd be fun, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no, they
It
were
would be
saying like
Good.
how extortionately expensive it is and detrimental to the society to have basically poverty in it, and there's the way that they could any way of alleviating poverty already like it's like the foundation, and that from that everything can build up and do better. Yes, like yeah, give friends, but like quote from the article in the conclusion. It is abundantly clear from our analysis that action on addressing child poverty ought to be an overriding policy priority in this field, albeit that strong associations between homelessness and adverse teenage experiences signal another critical intervention opportunity. Like, basically, yeah, like, it's all about helping the kids, and it makes
Never
sense,
mind
right?
the old guys. They can all die in the streets.
Well-
just about the kids.
Yeah, I mean,
Effectively, I think
no, I'm not saying yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
It's like with a lot of conservation things, of like it's hard to change old minds, and it's a lot easier to bring up kids being aware, and who then will be the next change. Obviously, climate change is like we need to do it right now, so you need to change the old minds. But it's a thing of it's the new guard, isn't it? That's how you make the biggest difference, the biggest change. Put money into kids.
Good education.
The charity Crisis, I wrote down, Crisis bets 10 billion would do the trick. So they like obviously feel like they did a study or compiled evidence to suggest that £10 billion will be able to sort out homelessness effectively. So it'd be part of it. It would include 100,500 social homes built every year for the next 15 years to tackle the amount of people who need it. Improving a housing benefit to actually cover costs and reflect rent rises. Increase help and fund periodical and proactive support for rough sleepers. I don't know if that's periodically. Prioritise probs. I don't know. Make it a duty for public bodies that are relevant to prevent it. Increase funding for critical time intervention, and that helps people leaving prison or at there are like transitions in their life and where you may become homeless. Say if you're leaving domestic abuse, or coming out of prison, things like that, or where that's this transition in your life where you may become homeless. They're trying to like get those people at that stage to help them to prevent it. Because prevention is always the biggest thing, isn't it?
That is mental when you think about how little money that actually is in terms of like government spending, and like, or look at how much they spend on all sorts of things. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
There was a thing that said like the UK something like the prevention cost of housing and helping is like, let's say 1,000 per month per something, but the cost to the government for the health and the issues that come with it with homelessness costs 10,000 per month, and it's just like it economically it doesn't make sense.
Poverty, for the reasons why homelessness, this is just on like Gov website, most of the UK, of poverty, inequality, housing supply and affordability, unemployment or insecure employment, access to social security, and then it was so that's obviously with like things which cause homelessness, and then for the individual factors include poor physical health, mental health, including, which I think was such a good thing, mental health including childhood experiences, which is saying it's not just a case of your mental health and like you've got a condition. It's about your upbringing. In the case of if you were abused when you were a kid, that's going to be a huge factor, and that's how your mental health, because I guess it's the way of your personality is altered from there on out, isn't it? You always have something in the back of your head, and then there's also violence, abuse, neglect, etc. Drugs and alcohol, bereavement,
Just
relationship
horrible.
breakdown, experience of care or prison, and then refugees, which I guess probably a huge thing will be refugees to an extent. I liked not that I liked, but the fact of bereavement. Because I know if you've got any joint accounts, I think if you've got life insurance or anything like that, all your bank accounts freeze that are joint. So it's a case of if your partner dies, there's a high chance that you'll be able to withdraw any money just in case there's been any dodgy dealings effectively with it. So yeah, if you can imagine for a lot of people, you just lost your partner. How do you deal with life without them, especially if they did whatever in the house? It can be difficult for people to get on top of like the bills or whatever because they don't know what the other part. A lot of times in a relationship, you take different roles. So if one person like, oh well, they usually did this and I did the other thing, suddenly that person's not doing the other thing anymore. So I can imagine bereavement's quite a big thing really, because or the biggest thing is death of a parent. Say if your parents died, what happens then? You're 16. How you not become homeless if you don't have more family?
Yeah, also you don't have that structure. You could have had a very nice childhood potentially, but if you don't have that immediate structure around you that works for you, because obviously people are different, then man, like you could definitely fall off the wagon pretty quick.
Yeah.
So I feel like that 10 billion figure that they're talking about, they could fix homelessness like that. I don't think it would be that simple by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
When you really look at how deep rooted some of these causes and some of these issues are, it's just in like society and in people's lives. I really don't think it's going to be that simple.
If you've got the right person with a really good knowledge and study of it, who had a really good team and they dictated how they did it and had a really good financial advisor, then maybe. But you don't get that, do you? Because it's like, who's got the lowest bid?
If the government put as much effort into it as they did, like, say, I don't know, COVID, then I think
COVID
probably,
now. They had chances before.
COVID now.
Yeah, imagine if the government decided actually, we're going to fix homelessness. This is our new priority. We're going to fix it. I'm sure that there would be dramatic changes. But
okay, well, have either of you got anything else that you'd like to add on the topic of homelessness, or if it's made you think any other way next time you see a homeless person on the street?
Yeah. Or somebody you meet and realise they are actually homeless. Just your definition isn't just sleeping rough. It's a case of they're like, either don't have a fixed abode, they're sleeping with not sleeping with somebody else, they're sleeping at someone's house, which isn't their own, or even just a case of they're so close to the line of becoming homeless that they need help from the government.
It's a really good conversation starter, I've found. Yeah, that's going to go down well.
Are you homeless?
So, I noticed you look a bit homeless.
Okay, I've got a question for both of you just before we wrap up this episode. If at 18, God forbid, or something happened with both of your sets of parents, just the parents that you have, they disappear completely at 18 for whatever reason, would you have the right social network, or would you have the right safety net to not be homeless?
Yeah. I say that only because one parent already died, so so the house.
Not at 18, John. That wasn't my point. I'm saying you turn 18, you become an adult legally in the UK, and suddenly your close support network, i.e. your parents or whoever it is, the one that you live with at the time, disappears. Are you fortunate enough to not become homeless?
I'd possibly, yeah. But that's my personal situation. But that's a case of
No, that's all the question was. Like, if my parents, for example, disappeared at 18, I would have had jobs, but those jobs probably would not sufficient enough for me to get any sort of good rent anywhere near that job, and I would definitely have relied on a friend or other family relative, maybe a grandma, but it wouldn't have been ideal for the job situation to not be homeless. And this is something that I was reading about, like if you're immediate, your parents gone, that's a huge factor in homelessness. Alistair?
I'm obviously very fortunate as well. I would be in a position that I probably would still be okay with family and everything else, extended family. But I think the interesting thing with that is also the factors that contribute to that in terms of driving away, driving dividing a family. Well, like I said, obviously the drugs and the alcohol is a big one, right? Or having a family kind of disown you almost, or like a I don't know, example of a young girl getting pregnant or something that's that doesn't align with the family values or that sort of thing. So I think that's a good example to have in terms of how easy it would be to become homeless when you've got those things taken away, and how there are lots of situations in which they can be taken away by things that you associate with homelessness, therefore leading to this whole sort of spiral effect, as it were.
Well,
But yeah, no, it's very interesting.
What you saying, Alistair, of like the driving away is, if anything, I would think possibly worse than a bereavement or a death. I know you say that because, say if your parent died, you'd have a lot of people being like, you need help and care. Whereas, as you're saying, Alistair, if you were driven away by a family, you're not going to get the same help at all, because suddenly people aren't feeling sorry for you, thinking, what happened, why did they kick you out, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think that's where you have a lot of struggle, and I think having a solid family unit personally, and that's something really lucky to have, because a lot of people, it's just not solid. It's not that thing of it doesn't matter what you do, someone's always going to be there. It's like no, it matters what you do, whether or not somebody will be there for you. And I think that's something we definitely take for granted, of like our personal situations.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your insights, guys. And I hope that you and your listeners that are out there perhaps have a second thought when you meet someone who's homeless next time. Anyway, that's enough for today's episode. Join us next week, and we'll catch you then.